The Mongols are here.
Call up the archers and deploy on the east wall.
Age of Empires 4 is disappointing, uninventive, and seemingly forever stuck in 1999. However, it's not a bad game. Now, if you're an Age of Empires fan, then you should know that I am too. I think the moment-to-moment gameplay of AoE's past is amazing, but not without faults. And if there's one thing you should know about me, is that I value games' ability to innovate and reinvent themselves. In other words, I love it when already fantastic games manage to reinvent the wheel anew while keeping some of the foundations of the previous games intact. One example of this, in my opinion, is how God of War revolutionized the series in 2018, and how, although to a lesser extent, Assassin's Creed became something quite different in 2017. And with that, let's jump into Age of Empires 4, a game so focused on history you can barely tell it apart from the HD remaster of its 20-year-old predecessor. Since you're here and probably looking for a good time, let's begin with the fun stuff first, shall we? The best thing I can say about Age of Empires 4 is that it's everything you expect from Age of Empires, with a few decent additions here and there. If you're new, Age of Empires is a 4x real-time strategy game, meaning that you're playing on a single game map instead of a large campaign map, and that you explore this map for interesting riches, exploit these riches for resources, expand your base with new buildings, and exterminate your enemies with your armies. This concept is simple enough, and in individual matches, the system functions really well. It's fun to see your town expand, and my personal favorite thing to do is to feel my presence expand across the map when I build walls that really tells the enemy that this here is my area. My favorite new thing about Empires 4 is the diversity among the factions. Playing as England will, for example, force you to play very differently than when playing as the Mongols, as England is more of a traditional city-based 4x faction, while the Mongols can pack up their buildings and migrate to a different location if need be, and can even earn resources for sacking enemy buildings. The same goes for other factions like the Chinese and the Abbasids. The Chinese offer a special building which will drastically increase your population, allowing you to field massive armies. And for the Abbasids, while they're also more of a traditional faction, I love their age-advancing system where you build extensions to your unique main faction building, and their architecture of course, which will also provide you with bonuses depending on the extensions you build. What's more is that now we get to choose how we want to advance in age by having the game offer us different buildings or bonuses every time. This means that your age will net you upgrades, and you can choose which ones to pick based on your playstyle each game. I think this is cool and adds a bit of a personal touch to every age upgrade. Age of Empires 4 offers a campaign which is there to essentially teach you the basics, and in my opinion therefore becomes quite boring. And a part of this is because the game itself, via its campaign videos, showcases maps and army movements as if this is a grand strategy game. Of course though, there is no campaign map in this game, nor any overall aspect outside of the individual battles. Now, I understand that AoE has never had a campaign map, and that the fans may mostly not see a need for it. That's fine, but for me, the idea of something larger bringing the individual battles of Age of Empires together is a really intriguing thought, a thought which in my opinion the game explores thematically in the campaign, but never really executes by way of gameplay. This is a big opportunity loss in my opinion, since it could have offered the game a real sense of innovation and change. And so, as it doesn't really dare something big and new, Age of Empires 4 continues with the same old. This is also why the multiplayer becomes by far the most fun aspect of AoE 4, because this is mainly the only section of the game with an actual sense of stake, where you'll have to be on your toes and your guard because actual humans are sitting on the other end of the map. And at its best, Age of Empires is intense and fun, bringing that 4x gameplay charm that Age of Empires 2 nearly perfected all those years ago. But this is also the problem with Age of Empires 4, and where it disappoints me the most. Because despite some great foundations, there just isn't enough here to create a lasting new experience. Age of Empires is Age of Empires is Age of Empires, if you will, and it really seems like the developers are content, after a long 4 years since the announcement and 16 whole years since the last number entry, to just remake the same game with a few minor additions. And depending on who you ask, the game doesn't necessarily even look that much better than the remastered versions of the older games. And if the gameplay is so similar to the point of nearly being the same game, then what's really the point? Additionally, There are a few key things that really irks me about how things work in this game. Controlling your units as individual soldiers only for them to be moved around as unorganized mobs just isn't that fun. And what's worse is that if you're attacking an enemy, some units may find it more interesting to attack a lousy building instead, completely ignoring the actual enemy. Now you might point out that this is part of the multiplayer meta to always be micromanaging each individual unit, but I think that's BS and is more cause for frustration than fun. It's also just so disappointing to see that seemingly nothing has changed in terms of pathfinding and unit collision in the past 20 years, as units will collide and mob like there's no tomorrow. It makes it feel like so little is done to make the game more realistic or more immersive, and that's a real turnoff for me. What's more is that I can't help but feel like Age of Empires could be so much more epic and tactical with a few changes to the formation system. What if we were given some of our total war powers where we could recruit units in groups rather than as single units, and spread them out across the field instead of having them be placed in random squares? There is a super simple formation system, but again, it's way too simple and takes way too much time to deal with in the heat of battle once the fighting actually starts. The only time you really see awesome formations from the enemy is in the campaign, and you'll never be able to see a scene such as this in a random skirmish, which in my opinion is a real shame. Again, you might love Age of Empires 4 exactly because it changes so little, because it remains Age of Empires just the way you played it in 1999. And that's fair, and I won't say you're wrong, because you're not. But to me, I really wish for something more here. The announcement trailer made it seem like the game was going for a more realistic and serious vibe, but what we got is arguably the most cartoony Age of Empires ever. What I really want is to see some real bravery in taking the series forward, like a real change to the maps where they're much larger and more realistic. I wanted Age of Empires to experiment with something that could bind various skirmish battles together, whether that be a fully fledged campaign map or something else. I wanted more depth in the battles, more ways to interact with other players other than just fighting. I want new realistic animations and formations that make it seem like we're actually playing the nations the campaign tries so hard to make us feel like. And if you say that all these changes would no longer make an Age of Empires game, then you know what? I'm fine with that. Because the Age of Empires formula is absolutely decent and can be really fun at times. But more than 20 years after the dawn of its foundations, they could really use some changes, some major additions, and some innovative new features that brings the series a fresher breath air rather than making it just another Age of Empires game, the same old stuff you've seen so many times before. It can be fun, sure, especially in the online multiplayer games, but in the end, despite some minor additions, it brings so little new to the table, and I wonder if you're not better off just playing Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, a game with arguably more charming graphics, music, and nostalgia attached to it. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to Age of Empires 4, but I have to say that the amount of changes really disappointed me, even though it can be really fun to duke it out online. If you've played the game or if you're a fan, what are your opinions of it? Do you like that it's so much like the previous games? Or would you rather it change up the formula? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, I hope you leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!